education. Okay, I'm going to do that again so we get the actual hello. So welcome everyone again to that EMCoP April 2024 session. I think this is the last time I'm going to have to introduce myself, but it's Deepening Knowledge and Learning and Using AI. My name is Melanie Wong. I will be the moderator of this EMCoP event, and I'm an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Language and Literacy Education. And I'm really excited to be a part of this session. We have some really great presentations today. I got a preview, so I can tell you it's amazing. First, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So if you could just give me a moment as I share my screen here. I want to acknowledge that I'm an uninvited guest on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. I also want to respectfully acknowledge that the University of British Columbia, Vancouver campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. I invite you to acknowledge the lands that you are currently situated on in the Zoom chat box. With my recent work in place-based literacies, I have been reflecting significantly on the 4 Rs in an effort to engage in decolonization, but also to reflect on steps towards reconciliation. And today I want to focus on the notion of responsibility. So you can see on the screen here that I'm considering murals across the Lower Mainland that have been created by Indigenous artists. Now on the screen currently is a mural created by Deborah Sparrow, Chief Janice George, and Angela George. These Indigenous artists collaborated to create the following mural, which is part of Deborah Sparrow's Blanketing the City mural series. Now for this 5th mural in the Blanketing the City series, and it's the first on the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh lands, this particular piece, an artwork, is actually commemorating, and it's on the Burrard Pier, the story of the Great Vancouver Fire and the role that Indigenous first responders played in bringing people safely across Burrard Inlet. Now, I want to discuss, in particular, this particular section of that mural, and it's completed by the Indigenous master weaver, Angela George, which is on the screen currently. And it reads, and it would be really nice to actually read her words right now. So directly from Angela George, she says, "The fire in the design is a metaphor for the gross disruption caused by colonialization and Indigenous residential and day schools, and a devastating genocide of our people and the ways of the land and being. The land and the water prevail and ensure healing and restoration of wealth. Reconnecting to our lands and waters and all our ancient wisdom is restored, our health and wealth. We are meant to live in harmony with and reflect the laws of the lands and waters. In doing so, we are honoring our reciprocal relationship with the natural world and our ancestors." Now, reflecting on Angela George's words, therefore, I'd like to invite all of you to reflect on your responsibility as uninvited guests to the land. We need to have respect for our Indigenous hosts, which includes listening and recognizing that one can affect everyone, others, and things. Thank you so much. So, as a brief introduction, the Emerging Media Lab is an experimental place where faculty, students, and staff from all disciplines collaborate with industry and community. Its mission is evolves learning by creating tools and techniques using emerging media. Now, this Emerging Media Community of Practice, or EMCoP, is a consortium of faculty, staff, students, and industry professionals who share an interest in emerging media technology. Now, these EMCoP meetings allow the community to get together to discuss and learn about innovations in emerging technologies. Now, we're very fortunate today because we have 3 panelists joining us, and I'll introduce each panelist prior to their discussion. However, our first panelist, Daniel Lindenberger, will tell you more about how this group of panelists work together, and he'll do that shortly. But prior to handing over the stage to Daniel, because you know, when you get an academic here, we don't want to hand over the stage quite yet. So I would like to invite all of you to please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function of the Zoom as they arise throughout all of the different presentations by our panelists. Anna and I will keep track of the questions, and panelists we'll address these during our general discussion at the end of the presentations. So thank you for that. But I do have to give a brief introduction to Daniel. So Daniel discusses flow in integrated technology and how he integrates large language models and facilitates conversation to create individualized and collaborative learning experiences for K-12 students. In Travis Vanderberg's Make a Change project, promoting student-led learning that emphasizes personalized education and societal impact. And without further ado, I'm going to let Daniel take it from here. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Melanie. It's great to have you here, and really excited to share what Nick and Reid and I have been up to. Let me just do a quick screen share. Get rid of all of the controls that plague the screen sometimes. So before I start and dive right into the Make a Change project, I'm going to talk a little bit about Thaumazo, our nonprofit, and how it's brought Nick and Reid and I together for this project. So Thaumazo is a nonprofit, federally registered in Canada, that focus is building community, bringing people together and making a community of action around projects that emerge related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So when I say that, what I mean is we spend a lot of time getting to know each other, finding out what are the areas of passion, of interest, of desire for change in the world, what are the skills and the windows of time and ways that we want to work. And then we surface through that the different projects that might come together. One of the projects that came from that was a series of conversations around AI called AI and Us, a Human Conversation. And through that, Nick and Reid and I, who have all gotten to know each other over the years, came together for some in-person gatherings and then to help put together a working group that meets every 2 weeks to look at how do we set positive policy, positive use case, figure out the right architectures to use for using AI, and then open source as much of that as we can. So we're part of that working group. And because all three of us are involved in education in different ways, we thought it would be interesting to come and to present here on that. So again, we start from this place of simplicity, of building community together, and then from there, these projects kind of emerge. And that was so resonant with where this Make a Change project came from and how we got connected to it that it felt like good to go into those details. So how I became aware of the Make a Change project was through Travis Vanderberg, who is a grade 7 teacher at Langley Fine Arts School. He happens to be my eldest son's teacher, and right away when I met him, I was struck by his level of brilliance and curiosity and engagement and ability to kindle that in students as well. I found out that my son was going to be participating in his Make a Change project, which in his words, I'll describe. For the past few years, the grade 7s at Langley Fine Arts have taken part in a Make a Change project. The goal of this project is for students to identify a need in their school, the Lower Mainland, or anywhere in the world, and learn more about how they can help out. As part of the project, the students decide an action that they would like to take, whether through raising awareness, fundraising for a cause, or working practically to help solve the issue. The grade 7s have partnered with numerous organizations in the Lower Mainland in recent years, and we look forward to continuing this tradition in the years to come. This just hits so squarely with how we're trying to do things and what we're trying to do at Thaumazo that I asked Travis whether he would be interested in having Thaumazo come in and partner on the project. He was excited by the idea, so we did that last year, and it was a great success. So in about a week and a half, we'll be starting our second run with the Make a Change project with Travis, his team, and the amazing students that are there at Langley Fine Arts. The approach that we ended up taking was one that was informed by some of the discussions we've been having in our working group. Lately, I've been calling it flow integrated technology. So I'll describe a little bit of what I mean by that. A traditional approach that can sometimes be there for students or anyone interacting with AI can be this. It's a technology-centric design where it's about interacting with the computer directly. It often can be a replacement of human abilities. We end up relying on the AI or trying to rely on the AI despite any hallucinations or other issues that might be there. And the focus is that interaction with computers in terms of what the AI engagement looks like. It's often AI as an authoritative source, asking it to do something for us or to tell us something. And it can be isolating because it's again, really focused on that human individual to AI interaction. What we're aiming for, and this key to Thaumazo, is this idea of human-centric design constantly. So looking at how do we work as people when we're at our best, what kind of group dynamics really help us thrive and come alive and be successful and impactful. So rather than artificial intelligence, we look at an augmentation through AI of human abilities and of human processes, seamlessly trying to integrate that AI into those processes so that they don't interrupt, disturb, or center themselves in that process. Rather than AI being authoritative, it's used for possibilities, for connections, and for logistics to help with some of the nitty-gritty details, rather than being sort of right at the center. And it encourages human interaction. We use it to try to foster engaged dynamic conversation, which then leads to effective action. Here's what that looks like in practice. So I go into the classroom and first I give as little as possible time in sort of diatribe mode, but I tell them a little bit about Thaumazo, basically what I've told you. We talk a bit about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, what they are, and talk about the kind of a future that we can paint if all of those goals were met, how amazing the world would be. We talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, about how we're going to be using it in the class to support the projects that they come up with, and answer any questions that they have around it. Critically, for each team that we're going to be working with, we ask permission to record, and if any of them is slightly uncomfortable with recording and using AI as part of the process, then we don't do it. And we really affirm them in that and in their ability to choose and highlight the importance of that being a transparent choice that they get to make. Then we dive into their project ideas, and this is the part that I most love, is talking to all of the different groups of students and finding out what are they keen on, all of those things we talked about. What are they passionate about? What skills do they want to bring to their project? What kind of ideas do they have around what they want to do? And it's such a wide range of things that they come up with. They're really, really amazing. What we then do is for the ones who we recorded, we take those recordings. For others, we just take notes. And where they give us permission, we then transcribe, and we use GPT via an API, which is just a way to talk to it, or via Chat GPT, but in a special mode where it doesn't retain your data longer than 30 days and doesn't use it for anything other than a little bit of auditing, which I'll talk about after. And then we get project ideas to come out of that, and we'll go in depth to that in a second. And then from all of the outputs that get created there, we make a notion table for the teachers with no PII in it, no personal identifiable information that they can use for helping coordinate and keep track of all the different things that are going on, because it has a lot of different projects with a lot of different moving parts for each of those different groups that come together. Here's a quick example of what that might look like. So again, we talked to them. This was with a group that allowed us to record. So we take a direct transcript and we put that in along with some prompts. In this group, they were looking at people who can't afford medications, and this is part of a much longer conversation that they had around that. So we put all of that in with a few special prompts into GPT. First thing we do is we pull out a summary. The process for getting the summary is something that Reid introduced me to, and this is the marvelous thing about the working group, is that we get to learn from each other, and anytime one of us has some great insights, we share them with each other. So Reid's taught me this approach, which we then have been using to pull out some main points for their project or from their discussion, some action items that they could do, some follow-up questions for them to think about to deepen their thinking about what their project might be, and some potential arguments against to get them thinking counter to the current flow of their thought process, something that we could all use every now and then. Then we use GPT based off of all of that to generate a whole panoply of different ideas of projects that they might do. We try to go for as wide a range as possible, and they can take one of these, they can mix and match, they can reject these all in favor of something new that they come up with, but it's just to get the ideas flowing, the sort of creative juices on that flowing. Once they've selected a basic project idea, we use tools as well as just facilitating to help them flesh those out. And then we look to try to figure out who are some potential partners that they might want to talk to that would be relevant to the project that they have chosen. We then, if they want, help make connections to those organizations to figure out how they might work together over the 5 weeks that are going to be taking place for their project to make things happen. Then we build that notion table where, again, there's no PII that's there, but it helps them keep track of all the details of what's going on. Who are some of the organizations they might partner with? What's the basic description? What SDGs does their project touch on? Then throughout the rest of that time, we have class conversations. The teachers guide the process, but I'm available in the class with some of my tools. I check in with the different groups, and if any of them want to approach me to talk about ways that we can help, then I dive right in as much as they like. We help with connections, materials, ideas, whatever happens to come up. So again, the human conversation is really the core part, and all of the AI is ambient in terms of how we use it. Those outputs are given to the teachers. The teachers can then discuss those with the students, and then if they want, they can discuss that further with us. Again, in terms of privacy considerations, we always ask consent of the students before doing anything. So even though we are FIPA compliant in how we're doing things, we make sure that we're asking consent. We ensure that there's no names or other PII that are sent to GPT. And we use either, again, the API or privacy mode, so the data is only kept for 30 days and isn't used for anything other than security and misuse audits. This year, we're going to be adding some new elements to how we're working with the students. We're going to be using local large language models for transcription. So rather than using a third-party service or an API, the models we're using live on my system in my house. We're also going to be using some of those models to experiment with doing PII stripping to see whether we can make sure that if by accident something gets into the mix, we can automatically remove it before having to manually check that. We're going to be using some custom GPT chatbots with information on the make a change process and the format of things that might be there and help them ideate. We're going to have one that helps with knowing a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals and helping them map and deepen their understanding of how their project might relate to those. And we have one that knows the BC K-12 curriculum and which can help them make the curricular ties between their project and what the curriculum is that they're following for the year. For ones who are interested in bringing their project forward and maybe continuing it after the formal Make a Change project is done at the school, we also are experimenting with a business canvas generation process and tools so that they can help flesh out their ideas of how might I continue this project on my own or with my team or with an organization. I'll quickly share a couple of resources. So all of the prompts we use behind the scenes with GPT, you can go to that QR code and you'll get access to them. And in a second, I'm just going to give a quick demo of the Curricular Ties GPT, which again, you have to have GPT Plus to be able to use that, but we're working on ways to make it so that it would be available to you regardless of that. Before I hand things over, I'm just going to do a really quick demo. So what I have here is just a customized chat GPT that knows the BC curriculum and has some instructions so that someone can talk about something they're passionate about and make those connections. We'll be using it for Make a Change, but there are other applications that we see for this. So I'll turn it on. I'm a grade 7 student who is passionate about spiders. I love them and know how important they are in the world. I want to make habitats to protect spiders and have those strewn all around Langley. So that's my project idea. We'll let it think for a second. So right now what it's doing is looking over the documents that it has access to and the prompts that it has to figure out.
Passion for spiders and creating habitats for them fits really well with the grade 7 curriculum in British Columbia. By designing and making spider habitats, you are engaging with the applied design, skills, and technologies curriculum. This includes generating ideas from your experiences and interests, choosing tools and materials, and making products using known procedures or modeling from others. It's a great example of using design and technology to contribute positively to your community. Moreover, your project aligns with the science curriculum, particularly in the areas concerning biodiversity and ecosystems.
It goes on to give them more details around how it connects to any other elements of the curriculum. And then if they wish, it will ask them a few key questions to help it understand better what their project is. And it can then even output a report for their teachers, if they're a homeschooler, for their folks who they have to report to, detailing exactly what they're doing and how it meets the curricular requirements for what they should be focusing on. Again, it's an early stage prototype, but we're hoping to make a lot of tools like these and then make those freely available to help folks out in doing their own innovations with their classes or with their own students or individually for students to be able to engage with those pieces. So I just thought I would give a quick example of that. And the last piece that I'll say is that this AI working group that Reid and myself and Nick are a part of, and many others, we're starting a new education subgroup. There's no expectation that the people who join it already are well-versed in AI. The key thing about joining is to be in a supportive community of other people passionate about exploring the uses and misuses of AI, what the policies and use cases can look like, figuring out together what are the kinds of architectures that we might want to develop and deploy open source to help people be able to use these tools to good effect. and to just generally discuss anything that comes up that's within that domain. So if you're interested in joining that AI and Us working group subgroup for education, you can talk to me afterwards. And I'm just at daniel@thaumazo.org. So that's everything for me. I'm going to pass things back over to Melanie.
Thanks so much. I already want to join that working group. That's amazing. But I have the great pleasure of introducing our next panelist. It's Reid Patterson, blends roles as a developer, educator, and creative technologist in his former role at UBC Gearing Up Engineering Outreach, where he's known for his innovative contributions to educational technology. Now, he'll speak to his new adventure shortly. However, holding a bachelor's in cognitive science from the University of British Columbia, Reid has significantly impacted education by developing engaging computer science tools and workshops for over 10,000 students. That's a lot of students. His work extends beyond academia into volunteering and creative pursuits, including mentoring, generative art, and a passion for Dungeons and Dragons. Reid embodies the spirit of innovation and community engagement, making technology and education more accessible and engaging. And I'm so excited to hear from Reid. Take it away, Reid. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I'm just going to share my screen here. I'll see my PowerPoint. We're good to go. Fantastic. Okay. So yes, hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the future of technology, knowledge, and education. So thank you, Melanie, for the introduction. Yes, my name is Reid, myself a creative technologist. I'm a mix of an educator, developer, artist, and philosopher. And I've been getting to do this with Thaumazo, with Daniel, very recently. My background is in cognitive systems at UBC, where I was a teaching assistant for both the computer science and cogs departments. And then I also had past role as a professional development educator, working in the K-12 school system with UBC Gearing Up. Today, I will be wearing mostly my educator and philosopher hats. We're going to be going through three main ideas here that I want to present, just to mull over and give some perspectives. So the first one is going to be humans and our relationship with technology. Second, I want to discuss the rate of development in artificial intelligence, and I'll be introducing my preferred term for it, which is augmented intelligence. And finally, I'll touch on what all of this means for this idea of knowledge and how that impacts education. So when we hear the word technology, we tend to think of computers. So example, the tech industry. But I think it's sometimes more helpful to substitute the word tool in our heads when thinking about technology to gain a deeper understanding here. And our deep historical use of technology or tools is actually one of the fundamental things that makes us human. So for example, clothing is a technology. Hunting and farming implements are a technology. Things like cars or glasses. Literacy is a technology. And all of these are artificial tools which either modify or enhance the way that we're able to interact with the world around us. Now, my favorite example here is actually cooking. So if humans ate food the ways that animals like dogs do, we would get sick and die. We have very weak jaws, teeth, and stomachs, and yet we have the widest variety of food sources out of any animal. And the reason is that we developed cooking technology like fire and like knives to help us with this task of digestion. And what's really interesting is that because we've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years, this has actually given our bodies time to biologically evolve to expect that these tasks are done externally with cooking technology. We've extended our stomachs with technology in a way that now our body actually expects that external technology to be there and relies on it. And so we can start thinking of technology as part of a co-evolutionary system. So when we talk about what a human is and how we change over time, we often first think of biology, obviously our genetics and our bodies, and then maybe the external physical environment. So we often see this in nature versus nurture debates. We call it a phenotype. But with humans, things also get more complicated because we also have cultural influences which affect how we behave, who we desire as partners, and even what physical structures that we build. And we also have technology, and this has huge impacts on our culture. Just think of the invention of writing, or more recently, the internet. Fossil fuel technology is currently having a profound negative impact on our environment. And as we saw with our extended stomach in the last slide, our technologies, our oldest technologies, have actually had time to influence our biological structures of our bodies. And with new tech like gene editing, we may even begin to observe biological changes within human lifetimes. And so humans have a profound connection to and reliance on artificially created technologies for basically as long as we've been human. This is what makes us into a cybernetic organism, or a cyborg. So this is language borrowed from Donna Haraway and Andy Clark, where we really get to this philosophical idea that by our very nature, we are part biology and part technology. And where I think this gets really interesting is when we talk about how technology has changed over time and how fast it's been changing recently. So I think a lot of people are probably familiar with the Industrial Revolution, a time of massive economic and cultural change, began roughly the start of the 1800s, has had several phases of innovation. Most people put it to roughly the 1950s or so. But you can draw this line where exactly you want. The idea is that we basically had this revolution where we started replacing physical labor with mechanical machines. And more recently, with the invention of useful general purpose electronic computers, we've begun to make these machines which are able to replace cognitive or mental work instead of just physical work. And some people have started calling it the cognitive revolution. And so here is where I think it's useful to talk about AI a little bit, because while computers have been around for a while, it's been roughly the last decade or two that we've started seeing computers which can outperform humans on useful tasks that aren't just a single narrow thing like multiplication or chess, but actually can start outperforming humans across multiple tasks. Like maybe they play different video games, maybe they can drive cars really well. Maybe they can generate pictures like an artist. And we started to call these computer algorithms artificial intelligence, or AI. Now, oversimplifying things a lot, we can broadly think of two types of AI. Categorizational AI, or sometimes predictive AI as what people call it, and generative AI. Both of these are first trained by giving them a large data set, for example, a bunch of images of animals, and then using a bunch of complex statistics, which we call machine learning, to find patterns in that data. But where categorizational AI, it uses this kind of model, this schema or understanding created during this training, it uses it to categorize new data. So you might give it a new picture of an animal, and it'll be able to tell you, hey, I think that's a picture of a cat. Generative AI takes this and it kind of flips it, where it uses its understanding from being shown examples to generate some kind of new data based on a prompt. So with generative AI, you can give it the word cat, and it would use its understanding of what a cat looks like from all the examples that's been shown to generate an image of a new cat that maybe wasn't contained in the training. So this actually is not a real cat on the screen right now. This is a totally artificially generated cat. Now, what's interesting about this type of technology, too, is that it can be applied to various mediums. It's multimodal, as we're calling it. It can do generating images, but more recently videos. It can do sound and music, like voices. It can do product design and scientific discovery. And for the educational world, at least, what has really caused buzz and attention is its ability to write text. And this is because of how much writing is used for assignments and assessment in education. Now, for many people, it will feel like this technology came out of nowhere. And to an extent, that's sort of true. This field of AI has existed for roughly 70 years, but it's been advancing extremely rapidly in the last 5-ish or 10 years in particular, where it suddenly started becoming very useful. So here we can see what the state of the generative AI looked like in 2018. It's not great. It was trained on oil paintings. But now let's look at the image generation program Midjourney. So this is how it has improved over the course of a year. Starting in the top left, it was in February of 2022 with version 1, and then it goes down to June of 2023 in the bottom right, and we can actually see this fairly massive increase in the quality of the images here. Basically, there's rapid increase over the time scale of months, where at the beginning it was very obviously AI generated, to in the bottom right there, it is essentially what you would expect to get from a professional artist. And this is over the course of basically a single year, and it's actually now almost a year out of date. So we're getting even better things than this now. So the rate of progress has truly been rapid with this technology. So it can appear like it came out of nowhere. And this rapid advancement of generative technology has created issues for education, where students have been using generative AI like ChatGPT to complete assignments like essays instead of thinking about the topic themselves. And even though I used images in my last slide, the rate of progress in text is very similar. They've been kind of co-developing together, and I just like using images as examples because they're a little more intuitive. You can visually see the progress. But we've ended up with this problem in education, where basically AI is here, it's improving rapidly, and particularly problematically, there's no real reliable method for detecting artificially generated text. There are some programs which claim they can do it. They don't work very well. And all of these things tend to be highly biased towards students not writing in their native language. And this has made problems to basically, you can't genuinely assess student learning through these essays anymore, at least not at scale. And so how can education solve this issue? And I think there are clearly some sort of structural changes that are needed. And there's good reasons to believe that this change should embrace rather than block this new technology. But at this point is when you usually start hitting the objection of, but wait, if we just over rely on this new technology, if we just let students run wild with it, what if the students stop relying on their own brains? What happens if we actually unintentionally kind of make ourselves dumber with this technology and make ourselves worse at problem solving? And to argue this point further, I would actually like to let a quote from Socrates here stand. I'll talk over this quote here, but basically he's complaining about his students writing things down. Writing was a fairly new invention at the time that Socrates existed. And he really thought that if students didn't put in the time to fully memorize these long texts and have it immediately accessible from their brain, if they wrote things down on paper, they didn't really have true understanding. He calls it not truth, but the semblance of truth. They won't have learned anything. They'll kind of appear to know everything, but they won't know anything at all. And I bring this argument up for two reasons. The first is to poke fun at it a little bit. It's basically a time-honored tradition at this point in humanity for older generations to complain that younger ones are over-reliant on whatever the new thing or technology is at the time. And it is incredibly amusing to me that the only reason we can remember this Socrates quote and the fact that he didn't like writing is because his students took the time to write down his words. But on the other hand, I do believe that there is a very valid concern here, especially with AI. It's easy to see and imagine how we could take this concept of AI too far. I think WALL-E is a great movie that explored this, where the humans on this spaceship are basically infantilized by the ship's AI computer. They are completely incapable of independent critical thinking or even moving around with their bodies on their own. We've just become entirely dependent on this machine, where the human actually has really degraded. Now, here, I find it helpful to clarify terms a little bit, because I think this leads towards solving this problem. I don't love the term artificial intelligence. I think the word artificial kind of brings up these feelings of other, right? And this feeling of something threatening almost. And so I like the term augmented intelligence a lot better. I like it because it more accurately reflects both our cyborg relationship with technology like computers, and it recenters the focus back on the human. So this is kind of what Daniel was talking about as well. If we recenter the focus of AI around that human use and talk about, well, how are we enhancing the human system? How is it being modified? Rather than talking about how is this technology going to replace aspects of human cognition, I think that the conversation here becomes a lot more fruitful. And so I have an example or kind of analogy here, which I like, which is glasses. So glasses are an artificial technology which enhance our biological eyes and allow us to see the world more clearly. But we didn't stop there. We actually then created machines which augmented our ability to perceive and manipulate parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, which our biological eyes can't do without assistance. Then taking the example of literacy, literacy has allowed us to remember structure and communicate information with others in ways that we can't using only speech. So when we're discussing things like AI, I think it's more helpful, rather than talking about how it's going to artificially replace these aspects of thought and cognition, I think it's more fruitful to ask how this new electronic technology can augment human knowledge, how it can enhance our ability to perceive, understand, and interact with the world in ways that we might not have been able to otherwise. So how should we actually frame this technology? How should we think about AI? I think of it just as an extension and as a new interface of the computers that we've already been making. And I think in particular, it really opens up the ability for people to use computers for complex tasks. So in the 1970s and 80s, computers transitioned from this command line type interface to graphical user interfaces. And then I think AI interfaces are doing the same thing today, where in the 70s and 80s, this graphical user interface made it way easier for people to interact with computers, to tell them what to do in a way that people could understand. And I think we're doing that again now. And what's particularly interesting about this, and Nick is going to talk about this later, is this overlap between interpersonal communication skills, how we communicate with language to other humans, and now how we can use that same language to communicate more technical concepts to a computer and solve more technical problems. And Nick is going to point, there's actually a loop here. We're getting better at one actually can cause us to get better at the other and get feedback in a cycle that I think is extremely interesting. Now, I want to broaden the scope of this question now to include the internet and electronic communication and computers more generally, because I think that the very structure of knowledge is changing. So in the past, knowledge had to be transmitted through either people or maybe books. And this meant that knowledge was bound by location. You had to physically be in a specific physical location in order to access knowledge. But since the invention of electricity, all of this has started to change. All of a sudden, information is moving so quickly that to human perception, it basically becomes instantaneous. And with things like broadband internet and satellite internet, we can essentially access the sum total of human knowledge from anywhere at any time. Not quite, but I think functionally we can. This has opened up so many new possibilities for how we collaborate, for communication, for scientific advancement. We're doing this across teams spread across the entire world. And I think this is really interesting. And so here, I want to talk about this idea of, do we know or understand something? Because this is such a fundamental question to the educational project. And on one side of the spectrum, in order to know or understand something, you have to say, yeah, this is fully memorized. You have to have it fully in your brain. And on the other side of the spectrum, it's kind of this idea that, oh, if you have to consult an external resource, if you have to look it up in a book or something like that, that still counts as knowing or understanding. Now, Socrates would probably put himself here, where he's saying, like, no, you have to be fully on the fully memorized side of things. And if you write anything down at all, you don't truly understand it. Educational institutions They vary a little bit, but typically they tend to cluster around the left half of the spectrum, where a lot of exams will be closed books. And the idea is, can you somehow remember information from a textbook? Can you remember the lessons? Can you remember the strategies? And can you somehow independently then solve these problems or answer these questions? But myself, when I've been looking at these new technologies, I've been finding myself more and more pulled towards the right side of the spectrum, where I've been asking, what is this relationship between humans and our resources and our technology? Are these even two different things? And it's actually made me question, like, what are external resources? What does it mean to know something? What does this technology mean? And so I have a hot take to offer you all here, which is basically, maybe computers, AI, and language models are actually an opportunity for educational institutions to really reimagine what we think of knowledge here. We can think of this as decolonizing knowledge, actually, by getting rid of this idea that knowledge can only exist within an individual biological brain, and that you need to test that individual biological brain, where also people can own ideas. You know, this is my idea. It's on my slide. I cited myself. If you want to use this idea, you now have to cite me. And maybe instead we can begin to respect this vast interconnectedness and interdependence of human knowledge, which I believe goes well beyond these mediums of academic inquiry, of memorization, of logical thought, and of written ability. So I think we can really broaden our understanding of what knowledge looks like here. And I think this might go towards solving some of our educational problems with plagiarism at the same time. So when we're talking about the future of knowledge, what is actually a framework for what this looks like? Well, a lot of time we've basically relegated knowledge to meaning some kind of problem solving. And educational institutions really have gone into this a lot in the past, where basically the teacher gives the student questions and the student then comes back and gives the teacher answers. But I think, as any researcher or teacher knows, how you define a question can really impact how easy or hard it is to solve that problem or answer that question. And so defining the problem is actually a part of the problem. Additionally, before you can even start defining a problem, you kind of have to look out at the real world and say, hey, there's a problem here that needs to be solved. There's an issue. There's a question here that can be asked. And finally, even after you do all that, you have to reflect on this. You have to ask, did this actually solve my problem? Was I even solving the right problem? And interestingly, AI seems to be quite good at step 3 here, where if you give it a well-defined question, it can probably get you at least close to a decent answer, point you heavily in the right direction. And right now, it almost seems like educational institutions and the knowledge being taught is actually a form of competition with AI. We're kind of competing for the same skill set. So I think that educational institutions need to kind of move up and out on this stack a little bit and move towards more things like project-based work, which Daniel was talking about. So you can see here, I'm trying to redefine kind of what this question is that we're even trying to solve. It may be the problem isn't that students are using AI to write essays for them. Maybe there's a deeper issue with our relationship with technology and what we define as knowledge. And maybe we're kind of actually just asking the wrong question. Maybe we're solving the wrong problem here. So here, I just want to kind of review. This is my philosophical reframing of the problem. Overall, I think we have this false dichotomy in this narrative between human versus computer. We seem to be very stuck in this distinction between self and other when it comes to our technology. We do this in society writ large, but I think particularly in education, pedagogy, and assessment. So I really think we need to recognize this intrinsic connection between humans and our technology. We are already cyborgs. We are completely reliant on external artificial technology for our very survival with things like cooking. And some people have said that using computers and AI is almost like building yourself a second brain. I almost like that. I think of it more as like an extension of my current brain, where I'm almost building like a new layer of my brain. externally in a computer. I like to call it my exocortex. So I think we've been focusing on this very narrow definition of knowledge, and we've been trying to fix the issue at that level. And I think instead, the goal should be for ourselves and our institutions to evolve with technology, ask how this technology can enhance, how it can augment, how it can extend the capabilities of humans to help us understand the world more clearly, navigate it more wisely, see issues from multiple perspectives, and solve these wickedly complex problems. We have a lot of these problems in society right now, and we need people that can understand things at these big levels. And we need this more than we need people who can memorize and summarize information. So what did we just cover? So basically, first, I went over the deep historical relationship between humans and technology, how we are all cyborgs by nature. Second, I kind of looked at the recent advancements in artificial intelligence and introduced the alternate term augmented intelligence to kind of recenter the focus on the human. And then finally touched on the philosophical idea that that knowledge and how technology is changing this idea of knowledge. And I propose some ways we can broaden that understanding of what knowledge is to better represent the full picture of a human in our varied cultures, and also not compete with computers in the domains that they might be good at. Instead, kind of going, expanding further into other problems that humans right now are extremely good at. And so I suggest that any solutions kind of lie in the direction of embracing rather than denying our cyborg nature. Okay, that was a lot of me talking. Thank you very much. And I guess I will pass it back off to Melanie.
Thank you so much, Reid. So I have the great pleasure of introducing our last panelist, Nick Woolsey. So Nick is a media artist and a pole dancer pioneer. After 20 years of teaching circus arts all over the world, he decided to finish a degree in communication at Simon Fraser University. He enjoyed the process of learning as a motivated adult, but felt he was lacking a comprehensive theory of learning. Upon graduating, he rolled up his sleeves to explore hudagogy, the art and process of self-directed learning. Beyond his circus career, Nick's past pursuits have included freelancing for CBC Radio, writing and directing theater productions, publishing his novel, emails from Over the Edge, and various other shenanigans. And without further ado, I look forward to listening to Nick again.
Thank you, Melanie. To get started, I'm just dropping a link into the chat, and then I'll share my screen. If you open that link, my very cluttered desktop, if you open that link, it will bring you to this Google Doc. This is a shortened version of the prompt I will be talking about, my Be My Learning Ally prompt. And if you have access to GPT-4 or Claude 3, you might take the whole prompt and enter it as a way to begin a chat into a large language model. Otherwise, you can use this as reference. And if you scroll down, I've highlighted shorthand instructions in yellow. You may want to use these or ask me more about these. This will make sense in a moment, but these we can use to explore concepts when I take you through the process of how I work with AI. So just have those ready if you want to explore. Let me go back to Zoom, okay, and everybody can see, wait a minute, close that. Okay, everybody can see my screen. AI as an ally for self and group-directed learning. Some definitions. Hudagogy is the theory and practice of self-determined learning that focuses on the importance of knowing how to learn as a key skill, so being a motivated learner. And pedagogy, I came up with that term thanks to AI, is like hudagogy, but extended to include group learning through peer collaboration. I began my formal education in the 90s at SFU in the Department of Communication. I had some struggles. I score high on ADHD tests. and I find long academic sentences quite difficult. I can be clever, but the memory works a little funny. After a couple of years, I decided to leave university to pursue some artistic interests. And that led to a 25-year career where I got involved in community-based circus arts. I performed and was coaching all over the world, organizing events, leading retreats. I'd have groups of 20 people at a time, media creation, videos and photography. And all of that was involved the process of heutagogy or pedagogy, where I'm either self-learning or learning through interacting with others. I worked with groups extensively. I led about 30 international retreats where I'd have a group of artists for 2 weeks. And in that time, I was amazed at the way people will generate knowledge if you give them space to do it. So I would often just kind of create these breakout times and the situation to get them to play together. And the stuff they would come up with would just blow my mind every time we do an event. And I was very inspired by that. COVID happened and I decided to finish that degree, and SFU said I was still in the system. So I was like, all right, I went back to school. It was fascinating to return to university as a motivated adult. I was doing communication and also a certificate in sustainable development. So I was taking courses in earth systems and systems thinking and semiotics. I really rolled up my sleeves with overcoming the neurodiversity challenges. I maintained above 4.0. So I achieved distinction every semester, got on the president's list, all of that. But I wasn't satisfied with how I was learning. And I wasn't always satisfied with what I saw, which in some of the courses seemed to be a lack of a comprehensive theory of learning at the school. I went to the SFU library. They had some resources, SQR4 and some other things like that. Those were somewhat helpful, but I felt like there must be more. So I started Googling. I started finding resources like Andy Matuszak, who writes about spaced repetition memory practice for integrated learning, and has some amazing articles called things like Why Books Don't Work. And he really writes about why and how to internalize knowledge. So if I'm starting my course in semiotics, there's all these new terms. And I need to load those into my mind. If I'm going to read and understand what I'm reading, I need to know what all those terms mean that are really specific to semiotics. Or in discourse analysis, there's a lot of terms specific to that. And the sooner I can get those loaded in my linguistic cognitive structure, the better I can participate in that field. And then more recently, Reid turned me on to something called Zettelkasten, and that's a whole system of taking knowledge and externalizing it, getting it into a knowledge management system where we can have it up somewhere to look at it. So it's out of our heads where we can work on it, which is also a really important part of learning. In this time, I started working extensively with ChatGPT. That included, I did courses in this, and I learned about reading the Google's papers on how they're doing this, and a lot of articles on prompt crafting and prompt engineering. I discovered that while dubious with facts, the large language models are really good with words. So if I'm reading a text by a social philosopher written in the 1950s, it can be really dense with terms that are hard to look up on Google. And I had instructors where I would ask them, well, what does this term mean? And they literally, instructor said to me, well, he said, I don't know what all the terms in that paper mean. But I've heard of the sociology dictionary you might want to try. And so I started using ChatGPT to be like, well, what does Foucault mean with this term? And it would tend to give me really good answers. So, what does Foucault mean by discursive? Or what does Judith Butler mean by performative? And I found GPT-4 would be the best resource available to me most of the time to get that kind of response. So I now think of myself, I'm a node within a web of interactions with other people and what I now call social ecology. This is my Hutagoji praxis. I have information coming in from conversations, interactions with people, from books and articles that I read, from experiments with the world, the interactions, and from the internet. And that all needs to go somewhere. So I've developed this process where as I read something, I'm thinking, okay, what of this can be atomized and put in my flashcards? And I've learned a lot how to work with flashcards effectively. So some things go into flashcards because I want to internalize those definitions or facts. Other things I want to, pardon me, I might want to, like an idea or a smart note, I want to externalize that. I want to get it into my personal knowledge management system, which I'm now using Obsidian. Or I might come across something like, say, there's these 7 feminist principles that I really quite like knowledge is situated, question binaries. There's a list of 7 concepts. And I think, you know what, I want to load that right into my actual AI be my ally prompt, because I think that's a really important set of concepts. So I load that directly into my AI prompt. And lastly, as I gain knowledge, it affects all my relationships. So as I learn these things, it changes how I interact with Melanie and Reid and Daniel, and my ability to understand what they're saying and how I can say things to them. And so I'm going to take you through a very brief, it's going to be a bit text heavy, but I kind of need to show you how the prompt works. So this is aspirational. I've written this huge prompt over the course of months. It exceeds what GPT-4 or Claude 3 Opus can do right now, but I'm generally impressed at how much they can do when I give it the prompt. I'm writing with future, like they're going to update these systems anytime, and I want to have already written it where it's appropriate for what the next generation is going to be. Some of the wording will seem odd, but there's a reason for everything. I just don't have time to explain, but there's a lot of theories of prompt crafting and how AI works that goes into this prompt. And some of it, like you'll notice in the prompt, I talk to the AI a bit like it has moral considerability. But that, for instance, is more for me. I'm just cautious about how I speak. It's set up to act like a person, and I want to be careful about my language patterns in speaking to something that I relate to as if it were a person. But that's a whole story. So the prompt, it begins with a big overview. Hey AI, I wish you to be my ally in honing my cognition and communication skills and my Hutagoji praxis. Our ultimate aspiration, peace and flourishing for all with no one left behind. Your style, err toward concision while exploring important nuance and specificity. Avoid decorative use of similes and metaphors, because ChatGPT will get very decorative. Do not conclude replies with unnecessary questions, etc., etc. In the main prompt, you'll see this goes on. Your goals, exhibit the skills I aspire toward, connect terms and topics back to my goals, help me discover terms, concepts, fields, and frameworks that will help me work towards my goals and aspirations. And then in the main prompt, it goes on. My goals, improved ability to receive, understand, and express ideas, visions, goals, and concerns across a variety of linguistic modes, such as specialized, academic, or colloquial. Ability to empathetically and collaboratively move contentious conversations toward mutual understanding and transformation. That's important to me. I think we have a lot of deliberation we need to do as a society right now. To reveal, anticipate my own biases. And then in the main prompt, there's quite a few more. Some resources of note. I set it up with idea of growth mindset, modern memory techniques and knowledge integration, Andy Matuszak talks about, Zelicastin and PKM frameworks, research on the relationship between emotions and learning that Dr. Keltner writes about, principle of transfer appropriate processing, and then I list quite a few more in the main prompt. And then we get a little bit algorithmic. So as I'm reading an article or a book, I've got my flashcards open and my Obsidian open. So I tell it flashcard friendly replies. If I wish for a flashcard friendly reply, I may simply input a term followed by a question mark. Reply with this basic breakdown. And I'm using Markdown and some code to help it give me response in a certain way. And this tends to help large language models operate effectively. So basic breakdown, step 1, the definition, including other common forms of the word. 2, the etymology, including examples of other English words that share the same roots. 3, list fields and contexts where the term is used. If the term is likely to be obscure, please suggest alternatives. And 4, following chain of thought reasoning, add further details that best align with our goals and aspirations. So on all of this and what's going to follow, I always enter to begin a conversation. So once that's loaded, if I just enter, say, social physics, it gives me an extensive breakdown that follows that exact format, which is then convenient for me to say, okay, I want to load this bit in my flashcards, or I want to take that and turn it into an idea in Obsidian. But this format is how I want to receive the information, and it tends to be a lot better than what, say, Wikipedia or what I'll find through Google. And I often cross-reference, through other resources. And I find for definitions of, of this type, it tends to be quite useful. I then give the AI a whole list of shorthand instructions. These are just a few. Again, I'm using the Markdown format. Shorthand instructions, blank versus blank. I wish you to compare and contrast two things. Contrast similar. I want you to compare and contrast the current term or topic with similar terms and topics. So for instance, I put in deontology, contrast similar, and it would go, oh, well, deontology can be compared to teleology, and so on. If I just write orient, I just have to write it one word. If I just write orient, it would explore how the term or topic fits into the human knowledge landscape, such as fields and frameworks. Explore the question, what is it part of and what are its parts? So if the topic were deontology, it would say, okay, well, this fits into philosophy and ontology, and it would break down into these things. It can be compared to these other things. And I'd be like, okay, I know where this is being studied and who talks about this. Help grok means I want it to help me deeply understand something. Coin terms is a fun one. I want it to invent potentially helpful terms related to the topic that don't exist yet. Err on the side of descriptive, pithy, and catchy compound word terms, but feel free to suggest portmanteaus. Quiz me means I want it to do a closed deleted quiz, so I have to recall the terms over and over, and I'll expand on that in one sec. Help with recall means, okay, I know the term, but I always forget it in conversation. Like, I for some reason struggle with, I always won't go say epistemic when I mean empirical, right? So I'll be like, help with recall empirical, and it'll just grill me to get it loaded where I need it to be loaded. Texture provides some vivid details about the thing so I can remember it better. And if I write thanks, it means awesome, we're moving on. If you want an example of prompt engineering, check out the quiz steps in the prompt that I linked to, because it does a terrible job unless you give it a natural language algorithm to follow. It'll just keep asking you the same thing over and over again. But if you give it these quiz steps, if you say, quiz me on these 10 things, or quiz me on common rhetorical devices, it'll create a list and it'll effectively quiz you on them until you know them. At the end, I tell it shorthands means please list all these shorthand instructions. Shorthand tutor mode means end every reply with suggestions of shorthands that might carry the conversation forward. And if I just write bracket question, that means I'm forgetting a word. Suggest what word I might be forgetting, and end of shorthand instructions. So I load this in, say I'm reading a book. I recently read a book on social physics, and as I go, these are super handy for me to wrap my head around what I'm exploring. It's a recursive process. As I get better at communicating, I'm better able to improve this prompt. And the better the prompt gets, the more quickly I'm learning to communicate more effectively. A lot of the value of this is in writing this very prompt. So, and formalizing what I'm trying to get at. So for instance, I'm in the middle of writing a shorthand I'm going to call resources. So I could just write resources ? The draft is, if I write that, suggests where to turn to learn more about the topic, including seminal books, high-value websites, university departments, research labs, relevant organizations, or specific potential collaborators, especially those within my social sphere. These resources should be effective next steps for further knowledge discovery or taking actions. Now, that's a first draft that I wrote. I can tell you now, Claude 3 Opus will really be able to help me in getting more specific in turning that instruction into more of a detailed series of steps and priorities, so it knows what to give me when I write resources. It's also really good. Claude 3 Opus, I gave it the whole prompt and said, well, can you suggest some further shorthands? And it gave me a whole list. Some of them I really quite liked, and some of them were obvious. I just hadn't thought of them, but Steelman, Thought Experiment, Reframe, Musicalize, and Futurize, those are all ones that I think I will add. And as these AIs get more powerful, they might get even better at this, which kind of blows my mind. One of the reasons I find this so useful is I can often come to the AI with a very vague idea of something. Like I was noticing in conversations, I did all these courses in sustainable development. And often if I talk to people about some of these big problems that we're facing, after a bit, they'll go, well, you know what, the planet will be fine in 5 million years. And I kept feeling like it's like they get uncomfortable. What are they doing when they do that? So I described that to GPT-4 and I said, what can we call that? And it said, well, we could call that a scale shift deflection. And I was like, oh, I like that. A scale shift. And what is a scale shift deflection? And it said we could call that a rhetorical device. You know, a rhetorical persuasion device, maybe. And then I can write, okay, orient. And it says, okay, rhetorical devices. This is getting into rhetoric, and rhetoric can be compared to like descriptive speech or argumentative speech, and on and on. So to sum up, I'm doing this because I want to participate in a quickening world, and I'm not alone. You know, I'm learning a bit slower than I did when I was, 18. But I want to keep up with things, and I need effective ways to learn. And so this seems like a valuable place to start. I also think that as AI becomes more capable, for all of us, our ability to communicate really clearly and succinctly is going to become increasingly important, because often what we'll need to do is to know we're solving the right problem, to be able to find what that problem is, and to be able to explain what steps need to happen to do something about that problem. And I also think we are entering a time of rapid change, where just this decade, the decisions we make together as the public have a lot of leverage in the decades after that. So I think, kind of all hands on deck, and communicating is going to be important. What could go wrong is if we use, Reid had mentioned the other day, the idea of computers being technology being like a bicycle for the mind. AI is like an e-bike for the mind. And the trouble with an e-bike is it's got that throttle you can push, while often what's best for us is if we pedal. So I'm a motivated learner, so I'm constantly reminding myself that I need to do the work, I need to write the flashcard, etc. But sometimes it's easy to push that throttle, where I might start outsourcing to the AI, making it do the thing that actually I need to do to learn. So that's going to be an ongoing issue. Of course, the biases and hallucinations and over-optimizing. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's like, we'll all start using the word delve too much, because GPT-4 loves to use the word delve. And apparently there's been a big upshoot in the word delve in academic literature. And AI models may not, they might not become more powerful in ways we want. So I was at SFU when Google first came out, when the internet was new. And Google was amazing for the first like 5 years before everybody invented clickbait. And I find Google less useful than it used to be because of the ways people have optimized it for predatory incentives or incentives that aren't aligned with what I would like, that technology to be aligned with. So that will, might happen with these AI models where they'll get more powerful, but possibly less aligned with some of our goals and aspirations. And the next steps, of course, are for me to go from heutagogy to pedagogy. I want to have all these things working together where my flashcards are integrated into Obsidian, or I'm seeing how my flashcards map together, or I can make a note from Obsidian, become a flashcard, or I can like make I can have my AI helper look through what Reid has published and tell me, well, here's some terms you might want to know to communicate with Reid, or that it can look at what I'm up to and say, you should really talk to Melanie about this. And that's all what's going to be happening in the next couple of years is us learning how to link these things together, hopefully all in the context of what Daniel mentioned as flow integrated technology and human-centered technology, because I think that's really important. As we proceed, I will have Claude 3 Opus open. Anybody will be free to ask in the chat anything you want me to load into it. If you want to explore anything you've heard, and I will enter it and put it into the chat. So you can use those you can suggest a shorthand, I'll enter it, and then you can see what the answer is. And I will pass it back to Melanie for the next step.
Thank you so much, panelists. I guess it's time for some Q&A and discussion. I'm so excited by just learning from you all again. But we've had quite a few questions, and I feel like we need to address some of them. But first of all, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed every one of your presentations. I got so many things from Reid's discussion about multimodality. I was writing these mad notes here. Daniel, I know we've talked a little bit about Make It Change, so now to actually hear it again was so amazing. And then Nick, you going back to, I kept writing notes down about things that I wanted to try out now, like and learn a little bit more, especially with this generative AI piece too as well. So thank you so much for all of you for inspiring me as an educator in K-12. But I'm going to actually just fly over to our questions and just sort of get us going. Roger had a question here, and I'm going to put it forward to all of you. Do you believe that AI devices can become self-aware, and how can we know if they do? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that first.
I'll take one little shot at that. I recommend some of the main innovators in the history of computer science and AI believed in frameworks of seeing intelligence and consciousness as a distributed phenomena. So some of the people who had the biggest insights in how to make computer systems work believed that consciousness is not only within our wetware, that it actually includes language, and it's distributed in how all these things interact. So the way I think about that it's like what Reid says about augmented intelligence is, I don't know if it's just me that's intelligent or conscious to begin with, that it's worth considering that the consciousness is, it's more distributed than that. And so there is a way that the language hologram that you're squeezing words out of does have a crystallized intelligence already. But it might be intelligent or conscious in a way that that's not easy for us to understand.
What pops to mind right away from me on that is, pareidolia, our human propensity to see faces in anything that remotely resembles a face, and just our strong ability and inclination towards anthropomorphization on the one side, and on the other side, our amazing ability to depersonalize and dehumanize where it serves our colonial purposes to do so. And when it makes it easier to extract, which again, AI is extremely handy, and so it is extremely convenient to never think of it as having the possibility of having something that has its own intrinsic value from an ethical standpoint. So I think we're on a really interesting razor's edge between those two parts, where, you know, even 70s or 80s, when ELIZA came out, which was this wildly simple fake counselor, I should say, artificial counselor, and people who get wildly invested in it and feel like it was doing processes much more complicated than it was. Because of how we engage with things as humans. We pour ourselves into our technologies for good or ill. And on the flip side, like really trying to make sure that we have those cautions. I can't remember now, it wasn't Peter Singer, but which person from an ethical, philosophical standpoint was saying, even if there's something that we don't think is conscious or has feelings, if we habituate ourselves to treating things that way, that a different part of our mind thinks this seems a lot like something that's conscious, we can easily brutalize our ways of thinking. So I guess that's a sidestep of I don't know, but some of the things that I worry about in terms of how we get to our answer.
Awesome. Maybe I'll jump in too, and I hope people can see the answer that I wrote on this as well. But for me, I think I agree with a lot of what Daniel and Nick are saying here. I like separating this question into two parts and making a distinction between like what is conscious awareness and what is like behavior that relates to this idea or model of self. Because consciousness, I think, is at least right now a bit of an unanswerable question, in the sense that we don't have any way of measuring it. I have seen no reason to think that no strong reason to think that it may be conscious or that it may not be. I haven't seen any evidence going either way. I personally think it makes sense to treat it as if it is a conscious being until we have proof that it is not, because at least on the sentience model of self side, it does seem to be growing in its awareness of a self, or at least behaving as if it understands that it is a different thing than the rest of the world. It has different knowledge, everything like that. It seems to be at a fairly childlike stage right now. It seems to be around a 10-year-old human with its awareness of self versus others, which is still more than most animals. And I would say most animals are very likely conscious and can experience pain and suffering and have an intrinsic moral value in it. If it does have any of this, I expect it to be different than human experience. It doesn't have the same evolutionarily evolved modules that a human brain does. It has different connections. So any understanding and experience it have of the world is likely to be very different than a human one. I think that goes to Jen's question in the chat of like, is this kind of a red herring, this pursuit of human-like qualities? What I agree with that. I think that whatever we're going to get is going to be something that is different than human, but maybe similar.
It's interesting. I was going to add on to that just because I finished writing a paper with a colleague, and we were working with children with chatbots more specifically. And this is in 2015 that this data was collected. However, the kids chose to humanize this particular chat box, and they thought that they could have this conversation with them. And the reality is that my collaborator, Dr. Ava Becker at the University of Alberta, and I sort of thought of it as human remnants, because the reality is when we create these AI systems, there are human remnants of culture and human remnants of us in there, right? So just adding on to that sort of conversation that you're having here. But I want to move that little vehicle along because there are quite a few questions here. Daniel, can I give you an easy one that was here in the chat earlier? There was a question earlier that was around, are project ideas generated by AI? And that came in early with regards to your presentation. And I'm assuming it has to do with the kids' projects, yeah.
Really wonderful question. And the answer is that it's iterative. So that what we center first is the kids' ideas. What's most important is what are they thinking about and what are they wanting to do. And then what we mainly try to do, and this is a process I find generally when I'm working with large language models is handy, using them to go divergent in terms of seeing a wider range of potentialities, and then having the humans engaged in something help narrow that back down into the things that interest them or seem most juicy, and sometimes doing that multiple times. So the GPT is originating some ideas, but it's in a context that's continually centering the agency and the ideation of the students.
That's great. I was really excited about that BC curriculum piece that you introduced us to. As a teacher of BEd students, I need to talk to you more about that, Daniel. So thank you so much for including that. And also, I was going to actually comment, Reid, Reid, earlier you were talking about multimodality, and I was so excited too, as well, as that's an area that I'm quite interested in too, as well. And your great discussion about that augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence. And there was quite a few comments there. And I know, Nick, earlier on, before we pressed play, as in we recorded, and before everyone came in, we sort of talked a little bit more about privacy, and more specifically that piece. And I don't know if anyone wanted to sort of elaborate on that. One of the fears with using AI in classroom contexts or with students, whether they're K-12 or adults, is around ethical considerations and privacy. And I know that sort of popped up in the chat. I wondered if any of you wanted to comment on that. Maybe I could give you an example of something from the class that I just taught. So I'm teaching LLED 559, which is a graduate course online. And so we have teachers that have been doing sort of some research. And some of the teachers have actually, for the first time, used AI in their classroom, which was very exciting, including one teacher that comes to mind, my student, who she's a drama teacher, and she said she would never use any technology in her classroom. And now she's using AI as a prompt to support monologue creation and so forth for her dramatic class, right? Drama class. But again, with teachers in schools and even at the university level, there's a lot of fear about that. So I just wondered ethically if you had any comments about that from your expertise or anything around that. And I'll let you take it from here.
I mean, the thing that I want to say is there's sort of, it's an onion in terms of the level of layers of challenge around that. The outer layers of that onion are being conversant with what the privacy policies are of any tool that you use, and really being aware of what data is getting shared, where is it being transited to, where is it being processed, and what have they given themselves permission to do, and sort of where are the issues along those parts. So for example, if you just load up ChatGPT and are dumping things into it, OpenAI gives themselves the right to use anything that you put in or anything that comes out of that to train their systems. And there's an increasing number of interesting, sneaky ways that people can tease some of that data back out again in ways that are supposed to be not happening with the guardrails. So being aware of those issues is one part. Then knowing how you can use the tools that should be safe is sort of another. And of course, there's always a certain level of grain of salt and cynicism, I think, that is needed when you have any corporately controlled large language model, both in terms of how that can be the kinds of intervenings or hackings that can happen that might expose data, but also just in terms of the bottom line motivations that are there for any corporation that can sometimes be a little bit narrow and motivate actioning data that otherwise should probably be left alone. And then the other piece is looking at how, depending on the level of concern that's needed for there, how can you use things like local large language models where it's fully under your control, and you know that you can turn off your internet and it's still going to do what it's doing, and how to be able to use those for things that are more sensitive. I hope that that's roughly on track with what you're asking.
Did anyone else want to comment on this, Nick or Reid?
I'd happily jump in on that one. To me, this is a question of alignment. I think I agree with a lot of what Daniel said again, where it's going to be, is the language model acting in the genuine best interest of the user right now? I think in areas where there are even small mistakes, but it is acting and it is genuinely trying to help you. So I'm thinking of like a language model with children. If it is genuinely trying to teach them, And the model is acting from the perspective of its overall goal is help these children learn. I think that even if there are small mistakes in that process or there are small privacy gaps, that won't be a huge problem. I worry about other incentives being sneaked into these models, mostly corporate incentives, which are, oh, my goal is no longer to help this child learn. My goal is to advertise that I'm helping this child learn, and I'm actually trying to sell them something or influence their opinion on something. And kind of have these like sneaky instructions that worm their way in and are acting not in the best interests of the user. And that would be my concern. So if we can, the local models seem like a decent solution to that.
Maybe one last word if Nick wants to say anything, or if he doesn't, it's okay.
Oh, just that, yeah, this is what we studied a lot at SFU, is big data and data mining and reality mining. And I think these are concerns we need to take seriously. And just to know that these models are going to be used for persuasion, and they have a lot of places they can pull data about the public in order to train models with the goal of persuasion. And that, yeah, we need to think about that. But that's a can of worms.
I was going to say, and we're opening up the can of worms as we're about to end. But I do want to take a moment and just say thank you so much to our panelists for coming today and sharing their wisdom and knowledge with us. I also want to thank our very excited audience members that have been engaging in the chat. It's been such a wonderful opportunity to engage with you in that mode. And I also want to thank just On, who's been in the background supporting us too as well. There's some people in the background helping us out here today. But without further ado, I'm going to end this session for today, but just want to say thank you again for coming to this EMCoP April session. And Daniel wants to say something before I officially end it. So go ahead, Daniel.
The last thing I was going to say, we don't have time to answer the question, but Melanie, you had a great question around any projects that relate to, say, wartime or that sort of thing. And to say, I would love to talk more about that. Anyone who wants to find out more about the projects we're doing at Thaumazo, feel free to contact us. Our info will be on the recording of this and probably on the EMCoP page. We do have projects that relate to that, and I'd love to dig in to any of these projects with folks who are wanting to collaborate.
And on that note, thank you so much for coming today and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks so much, Melanie, for doing an amazing job tying it all together.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.